Before the end, his heart spoke in silences. Not with words, but with skipped beats, each one a secret he never dared to say. This is the story of a man who waited too long, a son who didn't know he was waiting, and a machine that listened when no one else did. A final heartbeat, a map left behind, and the truth that found its way through the quiet. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic, dust, and silent denial. Plastic chairs lined the pale green walls, spaced just close enough to make brushing elbows feel intrusive, yet far enough to make everyone feel isolated. On the wall-mounted television, a muted news channel flickered through headlines no one read. Outside, across the street, an LED news ticker scrolled relentlessly. One American dies from heart disease every 33 seconds. Inside the clinic, however, time didn't scroll. It stalled. Dr. Clara Nguyen stood behind the frosted glass of the nurse's station, fingers skimming the stack of morning patient files. Most were routine: cholesterol checks, follow-ups, one post-operative wound review. She almost missed the one marked in red. Callahan Thomas, age 56. Symptoms: fatigue, palpitations. Missed 2 prior appointments. Flagged: ECG abnormal, irregular intervals, suspected arrhythmia. She paused, eyebrows tightening slightly. The name wasn't unfamiliar. 2 weeks ago he had come in, quiet and standoffish, speaking only in the minimal syllables required for diagnosis. Clara remembered his hands, rough, oil-stained, and shaking. His eyes, shadowed beneath a worn cap, had avoided hers the whole time. When she had explained the need for follow-up testing, he had murmured something about errands to run. Then left, and now he was back. She spotted him at the far end of the waiting room. He sat alone, shoulders curved inwards like collapsing architecture. His coat, 2 sizes too big, clung to him like a shell. His hat was pulled low, almost hiding the worn creases on his face. In his lap rested a manila envelope, edges tattered, corners bent as though it had been held too often for too long. Clara stepped forward and called softly, "Mr. Callahan?" He looked up, slowly, as if pulled from some distant interior monologue. His face wasn't aged by time alone, it was aged by choice, by carrying something too long without setting it down. "Doctor." His voice was coarse, gravel rubbed dry. "You said I should come back." "I'm glad you did," Clara replied. "Come with me." The exam room was still cold from the night shift. Clara adjusted the thermostat, but didn't comment. Some silences were necessary. She gestured toward the exam table. He sat. "Any chest pain?" she asked, gently looping the ECG leads into place. He gave a half laugh, bitter, unfunny. "Only when I think about things I shouldn't." Clara paused in her motion, her gaze meeting his. "Pain isn't always physical, Mr. Callahan. But if your heart is hurting, I need to understand why." He didn't reply. The ECG whirred softly. On the monitor, waveforms blinked into view, sharp, jagged peaks climbing and collapsing in a pattern that Clara had grown used to interpreting, not just as numbers, but as narrative. She narrowed her eyes. 1 skipped beat, then 2. PVCs, premature ventricular contractions. Inefficient, wasteful beats that stole energy from the heart's rhythm. The intervals between beats weren't just uneven. They were erratic, not like a tired heart, like a troubled one. She printed the result and studied it in silence. "You mentioned palpitations," she said eventually. "How often do they come?" "Random," he replied. "Sometimes when I'm walking, other times when I'm just sitting or remembering things I didn't mean to." Clara scribbled notes on her clipboard. "That tracks. These irregularities," she gestured to the printout, "suggest your heart is under a great deal of stress. The electrical pathways are firing inefficiently. This isn't just fatigue, it's early-stage heart dysfunction." Thomas stared at the paper, not like he was reading it, more like he was listening to it, as if those jagged lines were whispering something only he could hear. "I always wondered," he said quietly, "if truth has a rhythm." Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" He didn't look up. "You know, like music. If you lie long enough, maybe your body forgets the beat, or plays the wrong one." The room stilled. Then he spoke again, his voice slower, more deliberate. 20 years ago, I left someone behind, a son. I never told him who I was. Never wrote, never visited, never even held him. He inhaled, and the breath sounded like it scraped bone. And now, I'm trying to find him. Not because I think I deserve forgiveness, just so he knows the truth. Before this thing gives out. He tapped his chest. Once, softly, like it was a door that wouldn't open. Clara didn't speak right away. She didn't rush to recommend medication or scans. She simply looked at him, saw the ache behind the shape of his posture, and knew this wasn't just cardiology anymore. "This condition is manageable," she said gently, "but only if we act quickly. We'll start with an echocardiogram and a Holter monitor, a wearable device that tracks your heart for 48 hours. Thomas tilted his head. "So, it listens?" Clara nodded. "Exactly. It records everything your heart does, every beat, every pause." He laughed once, a dry breath of irony. "Great, a diary I can't edit." Clara smiled faintly. "Or maybe a story your heart has been trying to tell, one beat at a time." The lights in Clara's office hummed softly overhead as she entered notes into Thomas's electronic record. Assessment, arrhythmia, frequent PVCs. Plan, immediate echocardiogram. Initiate Holter monitor, 48 HR. Cardiology referral pending. Patient expresses non-medical motivation for treatment. Psychological stress likely exacerbating cardiac rhythm. She paused and added a final line. Consider heart memory correlation. Patient may be recording something more than just electrical activity. Thomas Callahan sat on the edge of the exam table, shirt half-buttoned, a silence clinging to him that Clara had only seen in hospice wards. The kind of silence that wasn't born from pain, but from anticipation of it, like bracing for a storm after hearing the first crack of thunder. Clara returned with a small gray box, the Holter monitor. "This is it," she said. "It's small, light, but it doesn't miss much." Thomas looked at it as if it might bite. "Feels like a confession booth," he muttered. "Strapped to your chest." Clara smiled gently. "Think of it like a witness, one that listens without judgment." She carefully applied the electrodes, one beneath the collarbone, two lower down, then clipped the device onto his waistband. Thin wires snaked across his torso like veins made visible. "You'll wear this for 2 full days," she explained. "Don't get it wet. Avoid magnets. If you feel anything, dizziness, pressure, shortness of breath, panic, write it in the log." He raised an eyebrow. "What if I feel all of that all the time?" "Then," she said, "write like your heart depends on it." As she tidied the leads, Clara noticed something. Beneath his left rib, just above the monitor's placement, was an old scar, faded, but long, thin, and strangely deliberate. It didn't look surgical. "Did you ever have trauma here?" she asked quietly, her fingers hovering near the mark. Thomas didn't answer for a beat. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I had a brother, older, used to call me weak. Said if I couldn't take a hit, I'd never survive the world." A pause. "He gave me that, with a piece of glass, said it would make me stronger." Clara swallowed something sharp. "That scar's older than your arrhythmia," she said softly. He gave a half shrug. "Sometimes I wonder if they're connected anyway." She didn't argue. There were things medicine couldn't separate: injury and identity, memory and muscle. Some wounds outlived the body parts they bruised. Later, Thomas sat alone in his truck, Holter monitor gently buzzing against his chest with each movement. It wasn't loud, just a hum, like distant power lines or a heartbeat you could almost forget was yours. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the manila envelope he'd been carrying. Inside was a photo, one he had taken out and put back more times than he could count. A boy, no older than 4, smiling in a field of pumpkins. The child's hair was windblown. The sunlight hit half his face, shadowing the other. You couldn't see the eyes clearly, but Thomas remembered them anyway, or thought he did. He'd never been in that photo, never even been at that pumpkin patch. The mother, Rachel, had sent it in the only letter she ever wrote him after he left. No words inside, just the photo. Postmarked October 2007. Milwaukee. He ran his thumb across the image, and in that moment, the holter buzzed slightly, like it too had noticed the shift in pressure. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her office staring at Thomas's ECG. She had pinned it beside a dozen others, each marked by a patient's name and date. But Thomas's looked wrong, not just medically, but emotionally. It reminded her of a sentence written by someone who couldn't decide how to end it. There were stutters, pauses, drops, surges, and something else. A skipped beat that coincided with a pattern she'd only seen in grief patients. She scribbled in her notebook. Is it possible for a heart to remember regret? To play it back like a scratched record? She rubbed her temples and sighed. It wasn't just the clinical side of Thomas that unsettled her. It was the mirror he held up, because somewhere deep beneath her lab coat, Clara carried her own arrhythmia. Invisible, untreated, and emotional. Her father had died 5 years ago. A sudden stroke, no warning. The night he collapsed, she'd ignored 3 missed calls. She'd been in a lecture, presenting a research slide on early markers of brain ischemia. By the time she'd called back, he was gone. No goodbye. No I'm proud of you. No closure. Since then, she'd believed medicine could fix anything, until Thomas Callahan walked in with a heart that was breaking in a language she understood. The next morning, Thomas came back. Not for more tests, not for lab results. He was just sitting on the clinic bench when Clara arrived. A wool cap pulled low, a thermos of coffee clutched like a rosary. She stared at him through the glass for a moment before stepping outside. "I'm not open yet," she said, gently teasing. He nodded. "I know, I just didn't sleep." Clara's eyes flicked to the Holter monitor still nestled under his coat. "I can check the readings later," she said, "but I imagine it'll show a spike between 2 and 4 a.m. "Why's that?" he asked. "Because that's when most people listen hardest to what they're trying to forget." He gave a long, slow exhale. "I dreamed I was standing in front of a door, wooden, green, same color as Rachel's apartment in 2006. I knocked, but no one answered." Clara didn't reply. She just stepped aside and opened the clinic door. Inside, she poured him a cup of tea and handed him a yellow legal pad. "What's this for?" he asked. "Homework," she said. "Write him a letter, your son, even if you never send it." "I don't even know his name." "Then make one up," she replied. "Write to the boy you remember, the one in the photo." He stared at the pad for a long time. "Words don't come easy anymore," he admitted. "Doesn't matter," Clara said. "Your heart will recognize the ones that matter. It already has." He didn't start writing right away, but he took the pad and the pen and tucked both inside his coat, and the Holter kept recording. Every missed beat, every pause, every time the truth nearly made it to the surface, but didn't. The clinic emptied by midday. Most of Clara's regulars had come and gone. A retired piano teacher needing blood pressure meds adjusted, a high school athlete with a torn ligament, a young mother seeking advice on toddler fevers. But Thomas Callahan stayed. He didn't speak much, didn't ask questions, just sat in the sunlit corner near the bookshelf, holding the yellow legal pad Clara had given him, pages still blank. Every so often he would press the pen to the paper, then stop. He wasn't writing a letter. He was trying to write a confession. At one point, Clara passed by on her way to lunch and paused. "You don't have to make it perfect," she said gently. He looked up. "But what if this is the only sentence I ever give him?" Later that afternoon, she returned to her office and reviewed the Holter's interim data. The readings were transmitting wirelessly to her system in real time. She could see his heart, live, unfiltered, grappling with the effort of simply sitting still. Spikes of anxiety when he touched the pen, sudden deceleration when he stared out the window, a deep drop, a long pause. Around 1:17 p.m., when he briefly held the photo again, it was all there, in beats and waves. She muttered aloud, "Your heart's writing the letter, even if your hands won't." Thomas finally began to write around 2 p.m. It started slowly, a name he wasn't sure about, then a line, then a cross-out, then another. By 3 o'clock, the page was halfway full. The first paragraph read, "You don't know me. Or maybe you do. Maybe someone told you the story already. The one about the man who vanished before he had to grow up. I don't have excuses. Only a heartbeat that's tired of hiding." He kept writing until the sun dipped just below the blinds. Then, with hands trembling slightly, not from age but from release, he folded the letter once and slid it into the envelope with the photo. He pressed it to his chest. The Holter blinked. Clara was about to leave when she found him again, still in the same spot. "Ready to go home?" she asked. He hesitated, then stood. "This thing," he said, tapping the Holter. "It's strange. I've had it on less than a day, but I feel like it already knows me better than anyone else." Clara didn't smile this time. She just looked at him, deeply, and said, "That's because it doesn't interrupt." That night, Thomas drove home with the windows down. The cold bit into his cheeks, but he didn't care. He liked the way the wind scraped through him. It made the air feel honest. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he parked outside an old library where Rachel used to take him, before everything fell apart, before he walked away. He sat there for a long time, staring at the dark windows. Then, without thinking, he reached into his coat, pulled out the photo, and whispered a name he had heard once, in a dream. "Aiden." It came out like a chord resolving after years of dissonance, and the Holter caught it. A sudden elevation, a rise, then a fall, but steady. For once, steady. Back at the clinic, Clara stayed late again. She poured herself stale coffee and reviewed the Holter data stream. Thomas's name blinked in the patient list. She clicked in. She scrolled, stopped, scrolled again. There it was, 03:17 p.m. A prolonged burst of tachycardia, sudden and sharp, then a shift from erratic to steady. She compared it to earlier spikes and drops. This one was different. It was almost like the heart had finally spoken. Not screamed, not hesitated, but spoken. She checked the journal. He had written, "Said his name aloud. Not sure if I'm right, but it felt like I was." Clara leaned back in her chair. Medicine had taught her a lot. But Thomas Callahan, this quiet man with a broken rhythm, was teaching her something else. That sometimes healing didn't come in the form of medication or machines. Sometimes it came from saying the name you were afraid to remember. That night, Thomas dreamed again. This time, it wasn't a door. It was a child's hand, small, warm, reaching up to hold his. They were standing in a field of pumpkins, the same one from the photo. Only now, Thomas was inside it, present, breathing, whole. The boy looked up and asked, "Where were you?" And Thomas answered, not with words, but with silence, a silence thick with longing. Then the boy said, "It's okay, I waited." Thomas jolted awake. The Holter blinked, his chest damp with sweat, his hands clenched. He sat up, looked at the clock, 3:57 a.m. His heart was racing, but not from fear, from something else, from hope. Clara Nguyen stood beneath the glow of her refrigerator light, fingers wrapped around a cold glass of water, the rest of the apartment steeped in silence. Her scrubs were still half on, her name badge dangling from a drawer knob like a ghost of the day. She couldn't sleep. Thomas Callahan's Holter data had followed her home, not by file, but by weight. His rhythms pulsed in the back of her mind like an unfinished sentence, a stuttering truth. She opened her laptop, not to check labs or email, but to open an old audio file. Her father's voice, from years ago, crackled through the speakers. "Clara, if you're listening to this, I guess I missed you again. Maybe I'll always miss you." She had found the voicemail the day after he died, buried under system spam and work updates. She'd listened to it a dozen times, memorized every breath, every pause. Now, as Thomas's Holter report flashed in her thoughts, another recording of a body speaking in absence, she finally understood why she'd kept the message. Because recordings are a kind of mercy. They hold space for what we didn't say in time. The next morning, Clara found Thomas waiting again. "You don't have to keep showing up before sunrise," she said, unlocking the clinic door. He shrugged. "This place is the only thing that makes sense right now." She opened the door, motioning him inside. "How's the Holter?" "It's quiet. It's not supposed to talk." "I know," he said, "but I can feel when it's listening." They sat in her office, sunlight warming the edge of the file cabinet. "I want to find him," Thomas said suddenly. "Your son?" Thomas nodded. "I don't know what I'll say, or if I'll get past the door, but I want to stand in front of it, even if it never opens." Clara leaned forward. "Do you know where to start?" "I have the photo, and Rachel's name, and one city, Milwaukee." Clara's fingers danced across her keyboard. "I know someone in family records," she said. "Let's see what's possible." Thomas looked stunned. "You'd do that for me?" She nodded. "Because sometimes a diagnosis isn't what saves a life. It's the reason someone agrees to fight." That afternoon, as she waited for a call back from the clerk's office in Wisconsin, Clara asked Thomas to lie down for the echocardiogram. The tech was out sick, so she offered to do it herself. "I haven't done one of these in months," she warned. "You trust me?" "You're the first person I've trusted in 20 years, he replied. The probe pressed gently against his chest. The screen came alive in grainy black and white waves. And then, there it was. The heart, struggling forward, valve by valve, mitral regurgitation, slight wall thickening, LVEF just above concern level. "Not great," she muttered, "but not hopeless." Thomas turned his head slightly. "Is it strange to watch it while it's still beating?" Clara didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Every patient's heart looks different on screen, but yours, it's trying to say something." Thomas looked at the monitor. "Like what?" She hesitated, then said softly, "I'm sorry. I'm still here. I don't want to go before I'm seen." The call came at 4:43 p.m. A birth record, 2006, Milwaukee County, no father listed. Mother, Rachel Gray. Child, Aiden Gray. Clara printed the PDF and slid it across the desk. Thomas stared at the name for a long time, then whispered, "She did pick that name." Clara studied him. "You remember now?" "I remember the way she used to say it, like it was too soft for a world like this." He folded the page. "I want to see him. Then we'll find a way." He held the photo, the letter, and now a name. 3 fragments of a life he'd walked away from. Clara opened his Holter data once more. Spikes, when he said the name. Drops, when he touched the envelope. Rhythm shifts. At 3:17 a.m., during the dream. She wrote, "Heart responds to memory. Rhythm as biography. Holter equals emotional cardiograph." She paused, and then typed, "If he dies, this will be the only place where the whole story was ever written." The next morning, rain drizzled against the windows of the clinic like hesitant thoughts. Soft, incomplete, uncertain whether to fall or stay suspended. Thomas stood by the door in the same coat, now visibly looser on him. Not from weight loss, though Clara had noticed that too, but from something more subtle, the shrinking of a man who had been running from his past for so long, he had forgotten how to stand still in it. Clara handed him a folded note, a list. Blood pressure meds, ACE inhibitors, a diuretic. Take them, Thomas. I'm not afraid of dying, he replied. I know, she said, but I think you're afraid of dying before you finish this. He didn't argue. Clara turned to her desk drawer and took out a small black recorder, one used for verbal patient notes, barely larger than a thumb drive. She handed it to him. This isn't protocol, she said, but I want you to record something, anything, for yourself, for him, for the machine. He raised an eyebrow. I already have the Holter. She nodded. That one records your heart. This one records your voice. Put the two together, maybe you'll leave behind a complete version of yourself. He took the device slowly, like it weighed more than it should. Think of it like your heartbeat translated. Clara walked him out to the parking lot, where a rusted gray pickup idled. My brother, Thomas explained. We haven't spoken in years, but I called him last night. What did you say? That I needed to find someone. And he said yes? Thomas looked at the truck. He said, it's about damn time, then hung up. Clara smiled. She adjusted the collar of his coat, tucked in a loose wire from the Holter monitor. You might not get the ending you want, she warned. Thomas looked her straight in the eye. I'm not looking for an ending. I just want a moment. One moment where he knows I tried. She nodded, then did something she rarely did. She reached forward, pressed her palm gently to his chest, right over the Holter, and said, Then let this thing keep beating until you get there. As he climbed into the truck, the sky cracked slightly. A break in the gray clouds. Not enough for sun, but enough to make everything glisten. Clara stood at the curb. In one hand, she held the Holter monitor printout, a sheet of jagged, irregular lines that told a story most would never learn to read. In the other, she held her stethoscope, still warm. Thomas looked out the passenger window. In his coat pocket, a photo, a letter, a name, a black recorder, and a heart that had skipped more beats than he could count, but also a machine still listening, a machine still listening, still archiving, still believing that maybe truth had its own pulse. As the truck rolled out of the parking lot, Clara whispered into the morning air, Go tell him, Thomas, before the beat is missed for good. She didn't cry, but when she returned to her office, she pinned his Holter graph to the board, next to her father's old voicemail transcription, and wrote one word beneath it. The road out of town wound like a scar, long, crooked, reluctant to heal. Thomas Callahan sat in the passenger seat of his brother's truck, the Holter monitor pressed against his chest beneath layers of fabric. It buzzed faintly when he shifted, not audibly, but in a way that he could feel, like a breath against bone. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the clinic. His brother Mike gripped the steering wheel with the same intensity he used when they were boys driving through thunderstorms, knuckles pale, jaw set. You sure you want to do this? Mike asked at last, not taking his eyes off the road. No, Thomas said, but I have to. Mike nodded. Same difference. They passed gas stations Thomas didn't recognize, diners with flickering neon signs, a silo with graffiti that read, Do not wait. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his chest ached, not sharply, but insistently, as though something beneath the ribcage was trying to speak. Not the heart. The scar. Clara sat at her desk, watching the real-time Holter feed. Every 5 minutes, a new segment appeared. She sipped lukewarm coffee, eyes tracing peaks and valleys, with the attention of someone decoding a secret language. Thomas's rhythm had changed. There were moments of calm now, brief islands of stability, surrounded by clusters of PVCs and tachycardia spikes. Clara highlighted one area around 10:43 a.m., where the heart paused slightly too long. She flagged it. But what made her stop was the pattern, not the chaos, but the echo. It was as if the heart had found a memory and was replaying it. The spacing between beats, 3 fast, 1 long, was familiar, almost intentional. She whispered to the screen, "You're not just breaking down, are you, Thomas? You're trying to speak." Mike pulled into a roadside diner near the state line. "Food," he muttered. "I'm not having you drop dead on an empty stomach." Thomas smirked. "That would be dramatic." "Yeah," Mike said, cutting the engine. "And on brand." Inside, the diner smelled like burnt toast and old vinyl. They sat in a booth by the window. The waitress was polite, but didn't ask questions when she noticed the wires under Thomas's shirt. Mike ordered black coffee and eggs. Thomas ordered nothing. "You have to eat," Mike said. "I'm full of regret," Thomas replied. "It's heavy." Mike didn't laugh. He reached for the salt, then paused. "You ever think about calling him?" Thomas looked out the window. "You can't call someone who doesn't know you exist." He unbuttoned the top of his coat just slightly, and the halter wire shifted. Mike's eyes dropped to the device. "What's that thing record again?" "Every beat," Thomas said. Mike looked thoughtful. "That means every lie, too." Thomas didn't reply. He just folded his napkin slowly, as if bracing for something larger than either of them. Later, in the truck, Thomas rolled up his sleeve and stared at the scar Clara had noticed the day before. It had faded over the years. No one ever asked about it. No one ever cared. Except Clara. He remembered her touch. Clinical, yes, but curious. Like she wanted to know if pain could leave fingerprints. He ran a finger across it now, and suddenly he was 7 years old again, standing in the garage, arms over his head, trying to shield himself from Mike's shattered beer bottle. He remembered the sound it made when it broke, like a firework buried in sand. He remembered what Mike said afterward. "You'll thank me one day. That's the real world under your skin now." But Thomas had never thanked him. He had just learned how to make his body quiet. The halter buzzed faintly, a flutter beneath the rib, a skipped beat, another, then a catch-up burst. Thomas breathed slowly, deliberately. And somewhere back in the clinic, Clara saw the spike. Clara's phone rang. It was a voicemail from Wisconsin, a school administrator. "Hello, Dr. Nguyen. Following up on the name you requested, Aiden Gray. We confirmed he's currently enrolled at East Pines High, lives with a guardian, Marla Dunn. No biological father listed in school records. If you need further documentation, we'll need a signed release or court order." Clara froze the audio. Rewound, played again, lives with a guardian. Her hands gripped the desk's edge. Rachel was gone. And now the boy, Aiden, wasn't just unaware of Thomas. He was alone. Clara typed a message to Thomas's number. "Got an update. He's real. He's reachable. And I think he's waiting, even if he doesn't know it." She hovered her thumb over send, then tapped. The phone buzzed in Thomas's lap. He didn't check it right away. His thumb hovered over the screen like it wasn't a message but a verdict. Mike glanced over from the driver's seat. "You gonna read that?" "Not yet." "Bad news?" Thomas shook his head. "I think it's the opposite. That's what scares me." Finally, after a few long miles, he opened Clara's message. "Got an update. He's real, he's reachable, and I think he's waiting, even if he doesn't know it." He reread the words, then again. He let out a long breath that trembled near the end. "Reachable," he whispered. "Not ready, not wanting, just reachable." That was enough to make his chest tighten, not from the disease but from the possibility. Mike pulled into a rest stop off Highway 94. Thomas stepped out and walked along the edge of the pavement, coat wrapped tight, wind slicing up his sleeves. The halter buzzed softly with each step, like it, too, was anxious to reach the end of this road. He sat on a bench under a rust-streaked "Welcome to Wisconsin" sign, pulled the envelope from his coat, opened the folded letter, read the first line. "You don't know me, but I know you, the way someone remembers a melody they heard once but never forgot." He held the paper against his chest, right over the scar, right over the monitor. And for a moment, he imagined what it would be like if his son, Aiden, could hear that beat. Not in a doctor's office, not in a lab, but in a quiet room with a silence that welcomed truth. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her office, scrolling through Aiden Gray's public health data from the school system. Height, weight, vaccinations, asthma notation from 2nd grade, 1 ER visit for a fall off a bike. But what stood out was the pattern of absences, gaps, half days, and then a line from a nurse's note. Student reports fatigue and pressure in chest during running. Clara blinked. Her heart stuttered. Not physically, but as a reaction. Could it be genetic? She picked up the phone, dialed the school nurse under the guise of a potential familial medical match. They spoke for 12 minutes. When Clara hung up, she had a new note on her pad. Aiden Gray, age 17, curious, quiet, protective. Hates gym, wears his backpack like armor, reads on lunch breaks, no confirmed diagnosis, likely doesn't know anything. She stared at the list and underlined one word: protective. Mike pulled into a motel just outside Maple Heights. "You sure you don't want to stay with me?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "Too much history." Mike grunted. "Too much silence, more like." Thomas grabbed his bag. "You always said silence was strength." "I was wrong," Mike said, then turned the engine off. "Turns out, silence is just slow death with better manners." Thomas stopped in the doorway, his breath catching, then nodded once. "Thanks for driving." "You're still an idiot," Mike muttered, "but at least now you're a moving idiot." That night, Thomas sat on the edge of the motel bed, Holter monitor wires coiled against his ribs like a confession undone. The letter was spread open in front of him. He held the photo again. Aiden in a pumpkin field, face half shadow, joy glowing despite the lack of a father beside him. "I don't even know your voice," Thomas whispered. He reached for the black recorder Clara had given him, clicked it on. A soft red light blinked. He stared at it, then spoke. "I'm not much for words, but this is the only thing I might leave behind." He paused, took a breath. "Your name is Aiden, and mine is Thomas. I don't know what she told you. I only know what I didn't say. I'm sorry I wasn't there, and I'm sorrier that I waited until now to care." His voice cracked. "You don't have to call me Dad. I didn't earn that. But I hope you'll know that someone out there thinks of you every time his heart forgets how to beat." He clicked the recorder off. Silence returned. The Holter blinked once, then again. Steady, as if echoing the beat he had just spoken into the world. Back at the clinic, Clara scrolled through the Holter data, eyes narrowing on a new segment. Timestamp, 11:49 p.m. Heart rate, 89 BPM, 106 BPM. Dropped to 70 BPM over 40 seconds. Pattern, unstable rhythm, then sudden stabilization. It was unusual, not alarming in itself, but meaningful. She leaned closer to the waveform. The moment of calm was short but clean, a sequence of normal beats amid a sea of chaos. Clara frowned. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a stethoscope, not to use, but to hold. Her fingers curled around the tubing, remembering the way her father used to call her Doc before she ever wore a coat. The night he died, she had missed 3 calls. She had been presenting at a conference in Chicago. Cutting-edge stroke research, irony sharp as a scalpel. When she finally listened to his final voicemail, it was only 18 seconds long. "Hey, sweetie, just wanted to hear your voice. That's all. Call me when you're done." He never got to finish the next sentence. Clara had never forgiven herself, not because she wasn't there, but because she hadn't listened in time. Now, staring at Thomas's stabilized rhythm, she thought, maybe you don't need a miracle drug. Maybe you just needed to speak, finally, with a voice your heart could trust. She pulled up the transcription from the black recorder Thomas had uploaded earlier that morning via the clinic's mobile app. She read it in silence, and then, as a doctor, she annotated the moment. Verbal confession coincides with rhythm normalization. Emotional alignment equals temporary cardiac stabilization. But as a daughter, she whispered, "It's not too late for either of us." The next morning, Thomas stepped into the parking lot of the motel. The air was colder than the forecast promised, crisp, sharp enough to sting. He pulled his coat tighter. The halter rested quietly beneath, its leads pressing against skin, memory, and something older than either. He walked to the front desk and asked for directions to Maple Heights Public Library. The clerk, a young man with dyed blue hair and headphones, didn't even blink. "Down 2 blocks, across from the school." The word school echoed. He nodded. "Thanks." Inside the library, the air was warm, humming with quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't just absence of sound, but invitation to presence. He wandered to the newspaper archives, pretending to browse. But he was watching the front windows, waiting for the school across the street to come alive with activity. It did, at 8:15 sharp. Students poured in, backpacks sagged, phones flashed, laughter rose like a bird startled into flight. He spotted a boy on the steps, lean, jacket zipped to the neck, dark hair tucked under a knit cap. He didn't know if it was Aiden, but his hands trembled anyway. Thomas didn't approach, not yet. He sat in a corner chair, pulled out the folded letter again, and reread his own words. They didn't feel like his anymore. They felt truer. As if someone else had finally stepped forward to say what he'd never had the courage to. Back in her office, Clara dialed a number from the school nurse's report. Marla Dunn, guardian of Aiden Gray. "Hello?" The voice was weary, older, protective. Clara introduced herself, explained she was following up on a possible hereditary health pattern. "Has Aiden ever mentioned pressure in his chest?" Clara asked. A pause. "Sometimes," Marla said. "He says it's just anxiety, that it goes away." Clara softened. "I believe it might be more than that, but I want to be careful. I also wanted to ask, has he ever mentioned his father?" The line went quiet. Then Marla replied, "Only once. Years ago. Said his mom told him he didn't have one, that the man wasn't worth knowing." Clara closed her eyes. "I think he might be," she said softly. "He's trying to be." Marla sighed. "I'm not stopping anyone from showing up, but I won't let that boy get broken again." "I understand," Clara said. "If you were me, would you help him meet the truth? Even if it hurts?" "I'd rather he bleed now," Marla said, "than die wondering." Clara thanked her and hung up. She stared at her phone for a long moment, then typed a message. "Thomas, he's there. You're in the same zip code as the rest of your story. When you're ready, cross the street." Thomas stood on the curb across from the school. Backpacked students passed him like streams around a stone, unaware, uninterested. The halter pressed warm against his chest, picking up every tremor, not just in the heart, but in the space between breath and bravery. He didn't cross immediately. Instead, he reached inside his coat and touched the folded letter, then slowly, deliberately, stepped off the sidewalk. The crosswalk light blinked white, and the man who had spent 20 years hiding from a name finally walked toward it. Marla Dunn was shorter than he remembered. Her once black hair had silvered, pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her hands were chapped from dish soap and cold mornings, but her eyes, they hadn't changed. They were still sharp, still suspicious, still loyal to the boy who wasn't hers by blood, but who was hers in every other way. She opened the door halfway. Thomas didn't speak at first, just held out the envelope. "I'm not here to take anything," he said. She didn't take it. "You don't get to show up now," she said. "Not like this. Not when he's finally sleeping through the night." "I know. You don't. You think writing a letter makes up for 17 birthdays and a funeral." He flinched. She saw it. And that was when her eyes dropped, just for a second, to the wire that curled beneath his coat collar. "What is that?" He exhaled. A Holter monitor. Her brow furrowed. Heart trouble?